All right, I'm going to continue in Illustrator. I'm on the pen tool here, and I am making this shape, right? I always click on the anchor after I've made a curve so it goes back to a straight. Then I find the place where I can set the next curve, and I gently curve it out, and then I click back on the anchor. If I don't want it to cover up what I'm doing, I'm going to click on emptying the path. So I'm on the lime green layer, so it's showing me the vector I'm drawing. Then I go to the next place, I'm going to plot the curve. And I should have gone a little bit earlier, that's okay. Next place to plot the curve, better to have too few than too many. I can always add anchor points like you saw on the tail. Then click back. Click, curve that out, click back, click, set the curve, click back, click, set the curve, click back, click, pull out the curve, and then click back. That one got a little weird, so I'm going to undo that, Command Z. Set that again, set that curve. I don't like that I lose it on the screen. I can also use the space bar, to move the screen. I'll fix that little bump later. Now I'm going to go to a straight, back to a straight, back to a straight to complete it. Okay, now to actually see what I've got, I'm going to fill it with black, with the fill. Look at the stroke's still empty. Now, I've plotted it, and that's the first thing you need to do in Illustrator, always, whether you use all straights, whether you use the pencil tool, the pen tool, the curvature tool, you got to get the anchor points, and then you can use the small selection tool to have control of each anchor point. So for instance, I can adjust the handle here. I can also move the anchor point. And if it's just difficult, like that little bump, and I don't want to worry about rounding it or trying all these different things, I can just go, once I see the anchor points, I can go to the pencil tool. I can set it to be smooth, and I can start on the path and end on the path and clean it up. So another place I need that because I set the anchor point a little bit off. I could try to move the anchor point like I've shown you, right? And then I can set the curve. And that kind of works. But I can also just use the pencil tool. Once I see the anchor points, start on the path, end on the path, and I can smooth it out. Okay. So, I think this looks pretty good. I think maybe this is a little thick. So I'm going to try redrawing it just with the pencil tool. Starting on the path, ending on the path. And do I like that better? No. I can try redrawing this back into a slightly different shape. And I like that a little bit better. I'm going to smooth it a little bit through here. And you can get pretty obsessive, right? And so often I'll delete anchor points I don't think are necessary. And then I'll adjust with the small selection tool the handles just to have full control. Now that looks pretty smooth. And then there is this other point. This is the little things. If you're a professional logo designer, you have to pay attention to. Like when anchor points just get a little bit off, you got to move them back in. like so. So that they're smooth again. And you can spend a long time like refining and perfecting it. Okay, now I'm ready. I'm going to turn off my sketch. Not delete it, but just turn off the eyeball. And then I'm going to use my large selection tool and select everything that's visible. And now that it's selected, I'm going to drag it off onto the gray and make sure there's no white shapes in there. And there aren't. That's good. The last thing I can do is I can go up to Object, Path, Outline, Stroke. Now this means if there are any strokes in my image that are making it look the way I want, this is going to turn them into fill paths. I didn't have any strokes, so it's good, but that's a good precautionary tale because you don't want to have any strokes before we bring it over. Now I'm ready to save it. And it doesn't matter how you save it as an Illustrator file. You always just want to have it as your name. So I'm going to save it to my computer, and I'm going to save it with my name, assignment 4, Maddie Cat vector logo, something like that, some description. A lot of you are not saving your files with your name. That's a mistake. You really need to. Always put your name into your file name. There are going to be a lot of assignment 4s out there, so also add your name. Okay, now it's an Illustrator file. I saved it onto the desktop. It's right here. I can mark that green. But now I need it to be able to go into Photoshop so I can rasterize it and put it into Canvas. So the way to save it out of Illustrator, the best way to save it is to save as onto your computer, format as an EPS. An EPS is a transferable vector file. So think of it as an electronic file that goes to Photoshop, even though that's not what EPS stands for. And then I'm going to save it as, because I have my Adobe account, to the Creative Cloud, my AI file. Because then I can see all of the different ones I've saved to the Creative Cloud. You know, whether they're patterns or whether this was one from last semester. Because as soon as you have a vector, you can do all kinds of things with it. So this was like a wallpaper design using this tiger maze that I designed last semester. Like, Illustrator is an amazing program because once it's a vector, it can be used endlessly, right? It's all anchor points. And we're going to be doing that with our spot illustrations later, doing line art as a vector. But now this is saved. I can close it. I don't need Illustrator anymore. But I need that EPS file. So I saved it, and it's here. And I'm going to mark that as blue. Because an EPS can't go to Canvas, but an EPS can go into Photoshop. So now I open up Photoshop. And this is our first project we're going to make print ready. You're all required to print your logo as one of your 3. And it can be your black and white version like I'm doing now, or it can be your color version. So once I open up Photoshop, I say New File, and I set it up for an 8x10 print. So it's going to be 8 inches wide by 10 inches tall by 350 pixels per inch. That's because we go a little bit above the standard print resolution. Create. There's my 8x10 by 350 pixels. Then I drag in. This is the only way to do it where you don't mess it up. I drag and drop in my EPS. It will go directly center and it will fill the space because this is a vector, just like the vector shape tool in Photoshop. And then I'm going to hold down Option and I'm going to drag it from the corner until it looks good on the page. So in Photoshop, I want you to think of this as your black mat. This background that's black, that's your black mat. This is your white paper, and then this is your black logo on that paper. So you size it in a way that looks best. Now when you do that, Photoshop is a raster program, So you zoom in and you'll start to see pixels. But this is a smart object from the EPS. That EPS smart object is a vector. It is a protected vector, so you can't erase it without rasterizing. You don't want to rasterize it. You want to leave it as a vector, because just like a vector shape tool in Photoshop, this can be scaled, transformed, rotated, warped, and it will always be perfectly clean, no matter the size, which makes it perfect for a logo. If I want to move it up a little bit, I'm just going to hold down Shift so it locks in place because it's centered, and move it up a little bit. If I want to move it down a little bit, hold down Shift, use Move, move it down a little bit. But I think that looks good. It gives enough space around it. Now I want to make sure it's filled in with solid black, because vectors create in a default that's called CMYK, which is a printing black. But I want it to be an RGB black, like solid black for the computer. So what I'm going to do is double click on that layer, that vector layer, that smart object, and then I'm going to go to color overlay, and then I'm going to fill that with the blackest black, right in the corner at 100%. So you might notice, and I can see it on my screen, I don't think you can probably tell on the projector, but when I turn off that effect, the black is a little bit grayer, and when I turn on that effect, now it's an RGB black. It's solid black. Okay, now I am ready to save it. So I'm going to save it as Karl, assignment 4, black shape Maddie logo. Because this is a Maddie the cat, right? To the desktop as a Photoshop file. Right here, I'm going to make that green, because that's what I'm going to go back to make a color version. Now I want to save it in a way I can put it into Photoshop. Not in Photoshop, into Canvas. So I'm going to save it as a JPEG. File, save a copy, JPEG. Save. Now because this is our first print-ready file, and that's all you need to print your black logo, I'm going to save this into a new format, which is all called an archive format. And I'm going to say File, Save As, and I'm going to put 2 letters in front of it, capital P and capital R. That stands for print ready. Okay, then I'm going to save it in a new format, and it's a TIFF, T-I-F-F format. That's a transferable image format. I save it, and I always am going to want LZW. LZW is a type of compression that goes with TIFFs that is lossless. It will never lose data like a JPEG does, like a PNG does. This is why we're archiving it. It saves it for printing and for posterity. It's going to ask, do I want to include layers? Because usually TIFFs are flattened. And just say OK. And that reminds us, now that we're saving it as a TIFF, you can see TIFF there. Now I can go to Layer and Flatten Image. And now it's a rasterized image. It's no longer a smart object, but now this is optimized for printing. Right? And I can close that. And do I want to save it? I don't know. Because I already saved it as a TIFF and as a PSD, right? But where did it save that TIFF? Up here. I'm going to mark that as purple. Okay? Because that's my print file. So now, to turn this in, there's 2 steps. First, we go to our canvas. And we turn it in. Let's see, in the course. I'm on the wrong canvas page here. So I go to the course, I go to assignments, just to go right to assignment 4, where I post my final logo right here. We've already posted our sketches. It's the end of Unit 9. I scroll down to where I posted my sketches, and now I'm going to post my next component, which is my final black vector logo.